Picture this: a packed courtroom buzzing with tension. Federal Judge Raymond Blackstone leans over his bench, smirking, ready to tear into Karoline Leavitt. "Your title means nothing here," he snaps, voice dripping with scorn. He thinks he's untouchable king of his little kingdom. Big mistake. Karoline doesn't flinch. She steps forward, cool as ice, clutching a binder that's about to blow the roof off. 8 words slip from her lips. "Do you recognize the name?" Dominion circle. Dead silence. Phones whip out. Blackstone's smirk vanishes. His face cracks like glass under a hammer. Rewind an hour. A stifling courtroom outside D.C. The New Liberty Alliance, a veterans charity, is on trial for fraud, a case reeking of politics. Blackstone, a known Trump hater, is set to bury them. Then Karoline walks in, not a lawyer, just a witness with truth as her weapon. What happens next is unreal. She doesn't just defend the charity, she unleashes a firestorm of evidence: bank records, sealed rulings, dirty cash tied to the Dominion Circle, a secret network of corrupt judges. The room erupts. Blackstone slams his gavel, shouting, "I'm a federal judge, you can't do this." But it's too late. FBI agents storm in. Handcuffs click. Blackstone's "please, I have immunity" echo as he's dragged out, robes flapping like a fallen tyrant. In 60 minutes, Karoline turns a routine hearing into a viral reckoning. Her final words: "Justice doesn't bend for anyone." The crowd roars. X explodes with hashtag Karoline for Justice. Clips of Blackstone's meltdown rack up millions of views. Americans call her a hero, gutsy, relentless, a Gen Z legend. Want the full scoop? Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Share this now. Because this isn't just a story, it's a warning to every corrupt power out there. Karoline's coming for you. The courtroom froze, a silence so sharp it cut through the air like a blade. Judge Lawrence Whitmore, once the pillar of Pacific law, gripped his gavel knuckles, white eyes blazing with defiance. Seconds ago he'd bellowed, "Order, I am the law here." His voice a hammer silencing dissent. Now Karoline Leavitt stood unshaken before him, her steady gaze locked on his, a USB drive gleaming in her hand. The shift hit like a shockwave. The air crackled thick with the weight of something breaking wide open. The audience, mostly gray-haired locals expecting a dull zoning spat, felt it instantly. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a reckoning. Not about land permits or a dusty charity. This was truth, raw and roaring. Karoline raised the USB, her voice slicing through the hush. "Play it." A projector flared to life. Whitmore's voice boomed from the speaker's cold and commanding delay. The Shepard file. "No hearing till the check clears." The words detonated. Gasps erupted. Boots scraped as old-timers lurched forward, jaws dropping. A woman clutched her scarf, whispering, "Lord, no." The bailiff flinched, eyes darting to the floor. Whitmore slammed his gavel, veins bulging. "Out of context lies," he roared. Too late. The room was awake. Karoline spun to the crowd, urgency sparking in her tone. This came from a flash drive stashed in Sheila Browning's desk, found by her paralegal, Kenneth Duane, last night. Sheila died in a crash we all questioned. Now we know why. Sheila's name hit like a thunderbolt. A beloved local lawyer gone too soon. Murmurs turned to gasps. Shepard case. Karoline pressed a family shelter facing eviction. They had proof their land was safe. Whitmore buried it. Next day, $50,000 wired to a British Virgin Islands shell company tied to the developer. The gavel crashed again, frantic. "Slander, hearsay." Whitmore shouted, sweat beading on his brow. No one cared. The storm had broken. An old woman shot up, voice quaking with fury. "My grandson built kennels for that shelter. You let it die and called it fair." Tears streaked her face as she pointed. "You sold us out." The crowd ignited, whispers swelling to shouts. Karoline clicked again. Bank logs, emails, a fresh bombshell, an email from Whitmore, 2 weeks old. "No audit. Funds secured. Proceed. Signed. Sealed. Damning." "You hid in shadows," Karoline said, facing him, voice like steel. "Not anymore." Whitmore lurched up, finger jabbing at her. You think you've won, girl? This town needs order, not your chaos. His voice cracked, desperation seeping through. A deep growl cut him off. No judge. We need justice. Sheriff Tom Hargrove strode in, file in hand, eyes hard. Storage unit under your son's name. Records match hers. You're done. Whitmore's face drained white. Arrest him, Hargrove ordered. Deputies surged forward. Handcuffs snapped shut with a sharp click. The room exploded, clap sobs, a man's quiet. Finally, Karoline didn't bask. She faced the crowd. More names, more files. This is step one. Kenneth Duane, Rose's voice trembling. Sheila would be proud. Karoline's eyes shone. For her. For them all. As Whitmore was dragged out, the golden dusk glowed outside. Not just victory restoration. Truth loud and alive, proving justice still burns bright. Just days after Judge Maxwell Carter was led out of court in handcuffs, the storm hadn't passed. It was only just beginning. The courtroom may have gone quiet, but across the nation the noise was growing louder. On TV, in diners, in churches, and town halls, folks were talking. Not just about a single corrupt judge, but something deeper, how far the rot really went. And at the center of it all, Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in American history. She wasn't a prosecutor. She wasn't a lawyer. But somehow this bold, sharp Gen Z patriot had done what others feared. She stood up to the system, and the system blinked. Back in Washington, D.C., Karoline sat at her desk long after sunset, sifting through the stack of documents the FBI had recovered from Judge Carter's office. Her husband brought her a warm cup of tea. Chamomile, her favorite, but it went untouched. Her eyes stayed locked on a printed name. Judge Leonard Sinclair. A federal judge in Denver, Colorado, connected to the Liberty Fund. Bank records showed $85,000, transferred into a Cayman Islands account just days after he dismissed a major whistleblower case involving a defense contractor with ties to political donors. Karoline whispered under her breath, "This can't be a coincidence." The next morning, she met again with Special Agent Jack Talbot. A decorated Vietnam veteran turned federal investigator, Talbot didn't waste words. "This goes beyond Carter," he told her, tapping a file. "It's systemic. It's a pipeline, money in, rulings out." Karoline didn't flinch. "Then we expose the whole thing." Talbot nodded. "But you need to be ready. You're not just a press secretary anymore. You're the face of justice now." That's when everything escalated. One leak to the press revealed Judge Sinclair's name, and the media storm exploded. Headlines screamed second federal judge tied to Liberty Fund, and cable networks scrambled to get Karoline on air. But instead of talking, she let the evidence speak. She recorded a 3-minute video in the White House press briefing room. Calm, focused, and clear. No political spin. No party talking points. Just the facts matching bank transfers, dates, audit trails, and signed orders. The video went viral. Senior citizens in Pennsylvania watched it on their iPads after Sunday service. Veterans in Arizona played it at the VFW hall. Even skeptical viewers who once brushed Karoline off as too young or too political started leaning in. In Denver, Judge Sinclair panicked. He rushed to TV cameras, calling the entire situation a Trump stunt and dismissing Karoline as a radical press secretary on a power trip. But America wasn't buying it. Within 48 hours, Karoline flew to Denver with a surprise guest, Rebecca Quinn, a former defense analyst and whistleblower whose case had been buried by Sinclair. Standing in front of the courthouse, with Quinn beside her, Karoline addressed the nation again. "This isn't about revenge. This is about restoring faith in our courts," she said. "Because when people lose trust in the legal system, everything else begins to crack." The words echoed across the country. Baby boomers who remembered Watergate nodded. This was bigger than one judge. It was about protecting the very backbone of American democracy. Inside, Judge Sinclair watched the coverage from behind tinted windows. His hands shook. That evening, federal agents executed a search warrant on his office. Headlines the next day read, "Second federal judge under criminal investigation. Liberty Fund scandal expands." Karoline knew the danger was rising. Online trolls posted threats. Anonymous accounts spread lies about her past. Late-night hosts mocked her youth. Political commentators questioned her agenda. But she didn't waver. At her next press briefing, standing firm behind the presidential seal, she addressed it all. "Yes, I'm young," she said, voice steady. "No, I'm not a lawyer. But I'm an American. And I love this country enough to fight for it, even when that fight is hard." She paused, holding up a printed email from Sinclair's official court account. "Thanks for the timely support. Consider the case handled." That moment, clear, his powerful, undeniable, shut down the critics. Later that night, as she tucked her 8-month-old son into bed, her husband asked gently, "Aren't you scared?" Karoline looked down at her baby boy and replied, "Of course I'm scared. But I'm more scared of what happens if no one stands up." The next morning, the Department of Justice confirmed it. Judge Leonard Sinclair was under full investigation. But for Karoline Leavitt, it wasn't about chasing headlines. It wasn't about politics. It was about America and whether the people could still believe in justice. She turned back to the documents. 7 more names. 7 more battles. And Karoline. She was just getting started. Judge Blackstone's face was the color of dry brick when Karoline Leavitt, now a name whispered across courthouses and broadcast newsrooms nationwide, stepped back into that same courtroom where truth had already shattered one empire. Her eyes were calm, but her hands held the thunder, a single black USB drive and a neatly clipped stack of sealed documents. What came next would not only end one judge's career, but shake the very timbers of the American legal system. It was a brisk Thursday morning, the kind that made your breath visible and your thoughts sharper. The courtroom was filled beyond capacity. Elderly veterans, young parents, local reporters, even a few retired judges sat shoulder to shoulder. Outside lines wrapped around the courthouse for blocks. Some carried signs. Others clutched their smartphones ready to live stream whatever was about to unfold. But no one expected what Karoline had brought with her that day. Judge Harold Blackstone had a towering presence, broad-shouldered, deep-voiced, always impeccably dressed in a crisp black robe. For years he had been seen as untouchable, the man behind countless rulings that mysteriously fell against conservative nonprofits and religious charities. Some called it coincidence. Karoline had long suspected otherwise. Today, she was prepared to prove it. As she approached the witness stand, Blackstone narrowed his eyes, lips pressed in a flat, thin line. "Miss Leavitt," he intoned, his voice low and dangerous, "if you're here to grandstand again, you'll find I have little patience this time." Karoline's tone was respectful but firm. "With respect, Your Honor, I'm here to reveal the truth. And this time, it's your name that appears in the records." The entire courtroom held its breath. Blackstone leaned forward, clearly rattled. "You'd best tread carefully, young lady. False accusations will be met with the full weight of this court." Karoline didn't blink. "Then I'll let your own voice speak for itself." She reached into her bag, pulled out a small speaker, and plugged in the USB. Click. A few seconds of static, and then, unmistakably, Judge Blackstone's voice filled the room. "Get those faith and family documents out of the case file. I don't want them seen by the jury, especially not the donation logs. If anyone asks, say they were never submitted. We'll bury this one like we did with the Wilson case." A gasp rippled across the audience. Several reporters nearly dropped their phones. Blackstone's gavel came crashing down. Turn that off, he bellowed, his voice cracking like aged oak under pressure. That's illegally obtained. I'll have you arrested. Karoline didn't flinch. That audio was recorded by a whistleblower in your office, and it was submitted to the Department of Justice 2 days ago. Just then, the court clerk, a young woman in her late 20s with shaking hands, rose from behind the judge's bench. Her face was pale. Her name tag read, Emily Rhodes. Her voice trembled, but her words rang with finality. It's true. I helped cover it up. He threatened me. Said if I didn't delete the documents, I'd lose my job. Or worse. She broke into tears. A woman in the gallery gasped and whispered, Lord have mercy. Judge Blackstone turned toward Emily, his eyes blazing. You little traitor. You'll regret this. But the damage was done. Karoline quietly laid 3 documents on the table before her: official bank statements, internal emails, and a typed summary of audio recordings. This is just the beginning, she said softly, voice trembling with resolve. Judge Blackstone received funds from the Liberty Fund within 48 hours of ruling against 5 different conservative organizations. Every time. The pattern is clear. Blackstone stood, fists clenched at his sides. This is a circus, a political hit job. I have connections in Washington. Karoline cut him off. Not anymore. She turned to the lead DOJ official, sitting quietly in the back. The tall man stood up and walked down the aisle with slow, deliberate steps. His badge gleamed under the courthouse lights. Judge Harold Blackstone, he declared. You are under federal investigation for judicial corruption, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties. The courtroom exploded. Applause, gasps, and some stunned silence clashed in a storm of disbelief and justice. Blackstone stumbled backward, his confidence crumbling. You can't do this. I am the law. Karoline stared him down, her voice as cold as a New Hampshire winter. You were the law. But today, justice returns to this bench. 2 court officers stepped forward. One gently took Emily by the arm and led her out for protection. The other cuffed Blackstone, who resisted for only a moment before collapsing into his seat, a shell of the man who once ruled with fear. Outside, the news spread like wildfire. On X, formerly Twitter, the hashtags #TruthInCourt and #LeavittJustice began trending within the hour. Fox News broke the story before noon. CNN followed minutes later. And across every major network, the clip of Blackstone's voice ordering evidence buried played on repeat. Reporters scrambled to uncover more, and within hours, Karoline's documents revealed what many feared. Blackstone was just one name in a web of influence that included 6 other federal judges and multiple non-profit financial watchdogs compromised by bribes from the Liberty Fund. That night, while the country reeled, Karoline sat on her front porch with a mug of chamomile tea in her hands. Her baby slept soundly in the nursery. Her husband leaned over and said, "You've changed everything today." She nodded slowly. "We still have a long way to go. But we're not afraid anymore," he said. And for the first time in a long time, Karoline smiled, not out of pride, but out of peace. Because justice had taken its first step out of the shadows. It started with a crack in the courtroom's silence. One sharp breath, one shocked whisper, and then the heavy footsteps. Just when Judge Blackstone thought he could overpower truth with his gavel and intimidation, the front doors of the courtroom swung wide open, and in walked 3 federal agents led by Special Agent Thomas Raines, whose polished badge glinted like a lightning bolt under the solemn courtroom lights. The room fell still. Not a cough, not a whisper. Just the sound of the judge's shallow breathing and the slow, purposeful stride of the law coming for him. Karoline Leavitt didn't flinch. She stood exactly where she had a moment ago, documents in hand. Gaze, steady, voice calm. She had already exposed the tape. The recording from Blackstone's own office, played in front of a packed courtroom, had him clearly ordering, "Get the conservative evidence off the docket. This case won't be swayed by MAGA clowns." That sentence alone stopped hearts and broke them. The courtroom clerk, Emily Rhodes, had broken down in sobs, her confession trembling from her lips as she revealed how Blackstone had threatened her job, her pension, her very reputation, if she didn't destroy key evidence. Now here stood the FBI, and there was no turning back. Agent Rains stepped forward and addressed the judge not as "Your Honor," but as Mr. Blackstone. Judge Malcolm Blackstone Rains announced loud and clear, "You are under arrest for abuse of power, evidence tampering, and accepting bribes in violation of Title 18 U.S. Code Section 201 and 15/12. Gasps rippled through the gallery. A man clutched his chest. An elderly woman in the third row dropped her reading glasses. The gavel dropped from Blackstone's hand, landing with a dull thud on the oak floor. He blinked, stunned, as if waking from a bad dream that had just become real. "This is absurd," he stammered. "You can't do this to me. I'm a federal judge." But Agent Rains wasn't interested in titles. He motioned to his partners. "We have a signed warrant and video evidence," he said flatly. "Step away from the bench. You don't understand." Blackstone barked, his voice rising like a drowning man's last breath. "This is political. This is Leavitt and Trump pulling strings." He pointed at Karoline with a trembling hand. "She's the one trying to destroy this country." Karoline didn't respond. She simply lowered her documents and met his gaze with quiet strength. Agent Rains stepped forward again. "We have bank records. Your Honor, offshore transactions traced back to the Liberty Fund, deposited days after key rulings in your courtroom." Blackstone's face turned ashen. "It's circumstantial," he muttered. "You have no proof." Emily Rhodes sobbed harder now, standing up shakily behind the clerk's desk. I saw the transfers," she whispered. "He showed me. Told me to pretend the files never existed. Said he'd ruin me." The words cut deeper than any accusation. They weren't political. They were personal. Human. Real. Sir Agent Rains said quietly, almost with pity, "Now we're going to need you to stand up." Blackstone didn't move. He glanced around the courtroom as if searching for allies. None met his gaze. The court reporters looked away. The security guards who had once stood rigidly by his bench remained frozen, not stepping forward. Even the stenographer quietly packed her bag, her expression unreadable. It was over. With shaking hands, Blackstone stood. The agents moved quickly, one securing each arm, the cuffs snapping shut with a cold finality. The sound echoed like thunder across the room, from powerful judge to a man in handcuffs, in under 5 minutes. As they led him away, the courtroom erupted not in outrage but in applause. An older veteran stood slowly, clapping with a mix of respect and relief. A woman near the front wiped away tears and whispered, "It's about time." Camera phones lit up across the room, capturing the moment for history. On X, formerly Twitter, hashtags like #Blackstone arrested, Justice restored, and #Leavitt for truth surged to the top trending spots within minutes. In under 24 hours, Blackstone's fall from grace became the #1 news story in America. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had already begun to gather. Reporters with microphones, seniors with handmade signs, veterans who had followed Karoline's battle from the beginning. Some shouted praise, others simply stood in silence, watching as the law took back what corruption tried to claim. Karoline stepped outside after the courtroom cleared, her voice steady as she faced the cameras. "Today," she said, "we reminded the country that no one is above the law, not even those who wear the robe. This isn't about politics. It's about power and accountability. Judge Blackstone chose to betray his oath, and the people paid the price. But not anymore. Her words rippled across the nation. In small towns and big cities, Americans of all backgrounds nodded, clapped, commented, and shared. Inside the courthouse, agents found more. A file cabinet tucked behind Blackstone's private chamber held sealed envelopes containing names, dates, dollar amounts. 7 more judges, 7 more Liberty Fund transactions, 7 more cases that had been twisted in the dark. When Agent Rains showed the list to Karoline, she didn't flinch. "I knew it was bigger than one man," she said. "Let's take the whole network down." Agent Rains gave her a long look, then nodded. "We'll need you. Your evidence. Your voice. The country's watching." Back at her home that night, Karoline sat quietly on her front porch, a cup of hot tea in hand. The stars above Washington, D.C. twinkled gently in the clear spring sky. Her baby slept soundly in the nursery. Her husband sat beside her, hand resting over hers. "You did it," he said softly. "You stood up and pulled down a monster." Karoline smiled gently, but her eyes remained focused on the distance. "One monster," she replied. "But there are more." And in her lap rested the same folder that had brought down Judge Blackstone, now holding 7 more names. As the country slept, the wheels of justice turned again. This was only the beginning. The dust hadn't even settled in Judge Blackstone's courtroom when the real storm began. As the FBI boxed up the final remnants of his once powerful office, shredded documents, hidden drives, handwritten notes, they found something that made even the most seasoned agents pause: a black leather binder tucked behind a false panel in the back of his cabinet. Inside were names, 9 of them. 9 sitting federal judges, each tied to one elusive entity, the Dominion Circle. It was a name whispered in legal circles for years. A secret alliance of officials who ruled not by justice but by quiet collusion, accepting money favors and influence in exchange for shaping verdicts. Until now it had been rumor. Now it was real. And once again, Karoline Leavitt was at the heart of the truth. Standing on the courthouse steps the very next morning, dressed in navy with the American flag pin on her lapel, she faced a wall of cameras and flashing lights. Reporters shoved microphones forward, shouting questions, but she waited for silence. Then she spoke, not as a political figure, not even as the White House press secretary, but as a citizen whose voice had grown into something far greater. "This isn't just about one corrupt judge," Karoline began, her voice clear, calm, and unwavering. "This is about cleaning up an entire system, one built to protect the powerful and punish the innocent. But that ends now." The crowd erupted in cheers. Across social media, her words ignited a firestorm. Within hours, the hashtag Justice with Karoline trended nationwide. Seniors reposted clips on Facebook with captions like, "Finally someone with a backbone." Vietnam vets nodded in quiet respect, and young people, many of whom had never cared about courtroom news, now watched the full video of Blackstone's arrest, played again and again. It was no longer just a courtroom moment. It was a national turning point. Karoline didn't rest. While the FBI verified the connections in Blackstone's binder, she spent her evenings organizing files, helping whistleblowers come forward, and working hand in hand with Special Agent Rains. Her small D.C. apartment became the epicenter of a new movement, one focused not on revenge but on truth. And Americans responded. From Nebraska to Georgia, retired attorneys volunteered to review cases tied to the 9 judges. Veterans groups offered public statements. Even members of Congress, long silent, began demanding oversight hearings. "She's not just a press secretary," one woman told a local CBS affiliate. "She's our modern-day Paul Revere. But instead of a lantern, she carries the light of truth." Indeed, Karoline became a symbol, but not of glamour or power, of courage. She hadn't taken down Blackstone with money or influence. She did it with documents, a voice recorder, and sheer grit. And now she was using that same resolve to expose something even darker. a judiciary infected by political ambition and corporate corruption. The Dominion Circle wasn't just theoretical anymore. Emails traced to offshore accounts, deposits tied to specific rulings. Judge after judge, case after case, each thread of Blackstone's binder wove a deeper, more damning web. One file in particular stood out: Judge Lennox Pierce, who had overseen a major nonprofit fraud case in Chicago, where evidence was mysteriously thrown out and a conservative-run shelter network was shut down. Just 3 days later, a $250,000 payment appeared in a shared account under Pierce's wife's name. The timeline was chilling. Karoline didn't hesitate. She handed that file to the Department of Justice herself. By week's end, indictments were being prepared. The first hearings were scheduled, and a growing number of Americans began following not just the news, but her. At a town hall in Ohio, a grandmother stood up and said, "Karoline reminds me of when I marched for civil rights in the '60s. She speaks plain, fights fair, and doesn't back down." Karoline heard that clip later that night on the radio. She sat quietly holding her baby, letting the words sink in. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about the idea of justice revived, restored, and made real again. As the FBI prepared their next move against the Dominion Circle, Karoline walked into yet another courthouse. Not as a witness this time, but as a national figure carrying the hopes of millions. And as she entered, the crowd parted not out of fear, but out of respect. The fight wasn't over. But justice, thanks to Karoline, had never been louder. In a time of uncertainty, truth still matters. The story of Karoline Leavitt reminds us of something deeply American: that justice isn't reserved for the powerful. It belongs to everyone who has the courage to stand up for it. At 27 years old, Karoline didn't rely on political clout or courtroom titles. She relied on truth, documented evidence, and the kind of moral backbone that many of us grew up believing in. For those of us who've lived through decades of change, war, political scandal, and social upheaval, this story strikes a familiar chord. It teaches us that no matter how broken a system may seem, it can still be challenged. One voice, one act of courage at a time. You don't need a badge or a podium to do what's right. Whether it's defending a neighbor, holding local leaders accountable, or simply teaching your grandkids the value of honesty, your influence is real. Justice may feel slow or out of reach, but it's never gone. And in a country built on integrity and perseverance, stories like Karoline's remind us the truth still wins, especially when we refuse to stay silent.